All right, Slater here, the owner of Relentless Defender Apparel. We are here in the Ground Zero Media Studios, and I'm joined by guest Clint McNear from TMPA. This is episode 2 of Police Officer Involved Critical Instance. And the first episode, we talk about the actual critical incident, what happens and what can happen, and kind of the understanding of what a critical incident is and what the officers are actually going through. This episode, we are breaking it down and what is going to happen during a critical incident, immediately after, on scene, and what the officer should expect, what the officer needs to know, and ultimately what he needs to do, or he or she needs to do. So, first and foremost, let me introduce Clint McNear. He is the field rep supervisor for Texas Municipal Police Association. And again, just briefly discuss what TMPA is.
We're Texas Municipal Police Association. We're the legal representation for cops around Texas. There's about 88,000 in Texas. We represent just short of 33,000 cops, providing legal protection training and legislative efforts.
Okay. And on episode 1, we discussed, we gave a scenario. So if you want to watch episode 1, I highly encourage you watch episode 1 regarding the critical instance. But we gave a scenario where an officer ended up shooting a subject, and we went through the entire scenario on it. But now we're at the point where subject has been shot, the officer's on scene, and what we want to do is break that down and what the officer should expect and what the public really kind of needs to know as well about what's going on during the scene and why, really just the why, let's just say that. So first and foremost, let's break down. Officer gets involved shooting. We already know that the scene's somewhat secure now, and what is going to happen? What's the first thing that's going to happen whenever in the investigation starts out?
Yeah, so during a shooting, we typically say if you're not shooting, you should be moving, communicating, and evaluating. And as soon as the shooting ends, we want to continue in a couple of those things, and that's evaluating and communicating. Shots are fired. The first thing you want to do is evaluate yourself, see if you're injured or how bad you're injured, make sure no one else is injured at the scene. And if everyone's secure, suspect secure or down, and you're not injured, you got to start communicating. And that's everyone arriving, someone arriving to take the scene over from you. After you've been involved in such a high-stress incident, you don't need to try and manage that scene any longer. And part of that is getting legal representation en route. You should have an 800 number, an emergency number in your phone. And as a companion officer, if you arrive and realize that officer's struggling because of the stress or the dynamics of the situation, he may need you to help him make a call to help him get some legal representation there.
Now, talk about a public safety statement. Well, what is a public safety statement?
Yeah, we get asked a lot, what do I say or what do I not say, or do I have to say anything at all? And we call it a public safety statement. And really, you have to say something. For instance, if Slater and I, or if I'm alone in chase with a carload of bank robbers, driver gets out, I engage him in a gunfight, the other 3 occupants run through a neighborhood armed, potentially, robbing, raping, and pillaging a community, and you show up as my supervisor, what happened, Clint? And I'll tell you, nope, I ain't telling you nothing. While there are armed suspects at large damaging, wreaking havoc, I've opened myself up to a lot of problems. And so a public safety statement, really, given the facts I just gave, if Slater rolls up as my sergeant or lieutenant, hey, what happened? Hey, I was in chase. They said they're bank robbers. That guy right there on the ground got out with a gun. I shot him, but LT, there's 3 other guys that look like they were armed. They're running through the neighborhood. They look like, white males wearing, blue jeans or whatever. They appear to be armed, and they headed in that direction, boss. We probably need a perimeter.
So the bottom line is you still have a job to do.
Yes.
So ultimately, you get in a shooting, and in the case that we used, you get in a shooting, and ultimately it's the most extreme understanding that you are relaying information because there's an ongoing scene, there's ongoing information that they do need. By all means, it's not a statement. It's ultimately what they're relaying so that they can continue to do the work.
Yep.
And I think a lot of times you're right. In law enforcement, you think to yourself, okay, I just got into this critical incident. I can't talk to anybody. Well, that's not necessarily the case. What we need to do is be able to continue to do our job to that point until it gets relayed and relayed off to somebody else. And then you talked about contacting legal. And of course, we have listeners all over the nation. If you're doing this job as a police officer and you don't have legal, you are extremely on a very thin ice lifestyle. And the reason why I say it is because in this day and time, if you don't have legal representation being a police officer, we've seen it all over the nation. You could legitimately be 100% justified, but you're going to want that legal. You're going to want some kind of representation because we've also seen police officers get railroaded right and left. So contact your legal. If you can't contact your legal, you said a buddy, partner, someone along those lines can reach out, contact legal for you.
Yeah, you'll have a companion officer that will arrive on scene, and hopefully you verbalize that with whoever your best friend in the department is, or your partner, or whoever that is. And if you show up and you see that officer struggling, help him. Yeah. Help him figure out, do you need to contact family? Can I call your attorney for you? What do you need for me to help you right at this moment?
Yeah, and a lot of times we don't ever talk about that until the incident actually happens. But a lot of times what we need to be doing is pre-planning for that. And I think we talked a little bit about that on the first episode, but a lot of it is that understanding is have a plan in place. If you work with your partners and you work with 3, 5, 10, 15 different officers, sit and talk with them and kind of have that lined out and go through these scenarios. Well, let's move on and let's talk about now you've contacted legal. And now the scene is being investigated. The scene is going to be investigated by ultimately 2 different investigations simultaneously. Kind of go into that and discuss each one of them individually, if you will.
So after any critical incident, whether it's a death in custody, whether it's an officer-involved shooting, there's going to be 2 investigations, more than likely running simultaneously. There are instances, the agency I'm retired from, they were stacked. So the criminal investigation would be thoroughly completed and finished, and then the internal investigation, the internal affairs investigation, or the administrative. Oftentimes at larger agencies, those investigations are conducted in-house by 2 separate entities. It may be criminal investigation division conducting the criminal investigation and our IA division conducting the administrative investigation. At many agencies now, there's been a recent shift. The administrative investigation is handled in-house, and the criminal investigation is handled externally, generally by the Texas Rangers in smaller rural areas. In some larger areas have gone to the Rangers. But there will be 2 clear, definite investigations that do not cross in any form or fashion.
Okay. And let me kind of just work on that criminal side of things. First and foremost, the criminal side of things, that's a given. No matter how justified it looks, no matter what the case is, by law, there's going to be a criminal investigation. I don't care what state you're in. If you, and we're going to stick with the most obvious of critical instance, a shooting. Okay, if you're a police officer and you shoot another human, there's going to be a criminal investigation because ultimately, and let's call it to the point that the person was killed. Ultimately, there is a homicide that still occurred. Now we have to determine whether or not it was a justified homicide or if there was a criminal element to it. And when it comes down to it, a lot of times cops get so paranoid and so worked up over that because they're like, oh my God, I've never been criminally investigated. Well, understand something, that it doesn't make you a bad guy. Would you agree?
Sure. Yep.
And it's obvious it doesn't. But I think a lot of times it just puts so much paranoia into it, to the understanding that you kind of worry a little bit too much about it, when the understanding is you know what you did and you know what you did was justified, but there has to be this criminal investigation. Second of all, the admin investigation, again, and I know you're going to go and talk about this, but the admin investigation, a lot of times it may feel like it's you versus your department. And I think when that happens, it almost puts a riff immediately. Well, I think if more officers are informed about why this is and what's going on, and if they just watch this, and even if you guys are watching this, share it with your friends. Let your friends watch this, because a lot of times it's the unknown that's scary.
And the first time to have an understanding of what's going to happen to you in a critical incident shouldn't be when you're going through one.
Yeah, absolutely.
We teach academies everything. Now they teach them, finances. We teach them everything under the sun, but we don't tell them about what may happen the day you're involved in a shooting, or you get shot, or you have to take another human's life, or you put yourself in a predicament for criminal review where you could lose your freedom. We don't talk about that a lot. So all the stuff we're talking about, the first time you learn it shouldn't be when you're sitting in a car waiting on the detective to show up.
Yeah, it makes sense. Absolutely. So you got the two, and if you will, kind of break that down as well. On the criminal side, and just correct me if I'm wrong on this, the criminal side, ultimately there's completely different rules than there is on the admin side. On the criminal side, you have the right to remain silent. On the admin side, you absolutely don't, because you're under Garrity understanding on the admin side, and you have to give a statement, or you can actually be terminated. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You know what it boils down to? When you've taken another human's life, it's going to be criminally reviewed. And when you're in the criminal realm, Miranda applies. And I have a lot of guys that will call, and folks will call and say, hey, I'm getting called in to be interrogated. Do I have to talk? And I will say, well, are they going to ask you about a criminal issue or an administrative issue? They'll say, well, I don't know, but I think I'm going to tell them no. And I said, well, we need to understand, if it's a criminal issue, you have a Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate yourself. Miranda is applicable to a criminal investigation. However, if it's an administrative investigation and they're compelling you as a condition of your employment to talk, and you tell them to go hug a root, you're going to be derelict of your duty or insubordinate, and you're going to be terminated. And so really having a strong understanding of the finite difference, actually it's not finite, it's a pretty good gap, of what is Miranda and what is Garrity, because they're both very, very, very different. And if you're on a scene and someone approaches you to read you Miranda, you're not under an administrative investigation. If they come bearing Miranda for you, it's clearly a criminal investigation. And I think sometimes that's hard for people to understand. Somebody will call and say, well, I have a ranger that's giving me a call, and so I'm guessing it's just an IA. Well, rangers don't investigate if you used a bad word, or if you drove 3 miles an hour over in a car chase. That's administrative. And so having an understanding of maybe what you're going through, because it's a scary situation, it's a stressful situation, but you need to have an understanding of what it is and how those are going to play out for you.
Absolutely, I got you. So just to break it down, criminal. And we like to bullet this real quick, but criminal is you fall under Miranda.
Yes.
So everything under criminal, let's just take this. You say criminal, you're going to have a Miranda warning. Criminal is for, of course, the criminal investigation side of things. Criminal typically is an outside investigation, whether it be the DA's office. In Texas, a lot of times it could be the Texas Rangers. In many other states, it could be the state agencies or whatever the case may be. And typically it's going to be an outside agency investigating that. And some larger agencies, which is not very typical, it'll be an internal affairs type of case, working the criminal side of it. Of course, completely separate type of investigation than the administrative side of investigations. On the administrative side, you're going to have Garrity apply. Garrity means that when they read your Garrity, they can compel you to give a statement. And it's going to be usually handled in-house by an in-house investigator, and it's for policy violations, not criminal
policy violations only. And one unique thing about them is Garrity is a one-way street. I worked criminal investigations. I worked police shootings, and I had to have consent for an involved officer to talk to me. Internal Affairs compelled our officers to answer questions. Those officers, since they were compelled to give an answer, those answers were never provided to me as the criminal investigator.
So they never cross?
They never cross. They cross criminal. When I would complete my criminal investigation, if I did a well enough job and I walked across the hall and handed it to internal affairs, his job was almost null and void, because if I did a good, thorough, professional investigation on the criminal side, he should have almost everything he needs for his administrative investigation, unless his compelled answers discovered something that I didn't, which is very rare. But it is a one-way from the administrative point of view. I can't direct you, command you to answer a question, and then I file a criminal case on you or get a grand jury for it. Got you.
So let's move on, and we're talking about what to expect on scene. Okay, so we've identified what the difference in the investigations are between criminal and administrative side, who investigate those, and now we're moving on to what's going to happen on the scene. So you just get involved in a shooting. It's tensions are high, and what can you expect as an officer? And put yourself in the officer's shoes and have empathy for him and say, okay, now this has just happened. I've contacted legal. Legal's on the way. The scene is secure now. And now what can I expect?
Once the scene is secured and there's no evidentiary value being collected anymore, within your policy, your attorney is going to recommend that you shut down all recording devices or find a vehicle to sit in while you wait on your attorney that has no recording devices in it. If you're a companion officer arriving on scene, you may assist that officer in being aware that if there's recording still going on, to be mindful of what may be said. After shootings, you see every emotion out there. You see upset, you see sad, you see mad, you see every emotion after a shooting. And we need to, as a companion officer, help them be mindful if everybody's walking around recording. And the companion officer can do a really good job of helping that officer understand what's about to happen as well, by letting them know, hey, there's going to be some investigators arriving on scene. Your attorney should be here momentarily. Let's just sit tight. You already provided your public safety statement. Let's just sit tight. Generally, pretty quickly, there's going to be an attorney. Field reps try to go out on a bunch of the shootings, and then kind of being prepared for some of the steps that are going to rapidly occur once the masses show up. Investigators, attorneys, there's going to be some steps that occur pretty rapidly before you get sent home for the day. Your mags are going to be downloaded and a round count taken. It's not because we question or don't understand or doubt. It's purely to document. If you say you shot 3 times, your mag will be down 3 rounds. It's to protect the investigation and to protect you ultimately. On round count, one thing we recommend, if you've been own a piece of property and you shot at a coyote one night, upload your mag, because ultimately it is a challenge as an investigator. If Slater shot at a coyote the night before and he's down 2 rounds in a mag, and we arrive on scene and everyone says they shot, Slater says he didn't shoot, yet he's down 2 rounds in his mag, we immediately have to start working from trying to understand why is it. Always keep your mags consistent. If you carry all of your pistol mags maxed, keep them maxed all the time. If you keep your AR down 1 round, if you carry all your 30 mags at 29, whatever you do it consistent, because it's very, very difficult when you arrive on a scene. The focus is already that, people want to already assume it's a bad shooting. Well, then when we have not clear numbers on round counts, and it can be something as simple as, man, I shot a snake in the driveway last night and forgot to put 2 rounds back in. Always keep your mags topped off. And if you did that and you're at a scene like that, get it out there then, because that's very explainable, rather than coming up a few days later after it's become a problem. Before you leave that day, you're going to have your photo taken. We go to a lot of scenes where a suspect is arrested and says, well, I didn't know it was a cops coming through my door. So I'm going to photograph Slater before he leaves with his SWAT vest on that says police and his ball cap that says SWAT, just as he was as he made entry, so that when we go to court and he says, well, I didn't know it was the police, blah, blah, here's photos exactly as Slater made entry, exactly as he looked on that day. You knew he was a cop when he made entry. A lot of times it's uncomfortable. Guys are like, man, why are you taking my pictures? It's a mug shot. What's going on? And again, it's part of the investigation and trying to be sure we have integrity of the investigation and good facts for you and for the investigation.
Okay. And let's back up to a little bit. Let's talk about the statement, the preliminary statement. Okay. What are you given on the preliminary statement?
It's your preliminary statement will basically be the public safety statement. I got sent on a family disturbance call. When I knocked on the door, the guy answered with a shotgun. He raised it. I shot twice, and I secured the scene. I mean, it's the bare, and really with walkthroughs, with the advent of so many body cameras and dash cams, walkthroughs and things like that have really gone by the wayside because it's all on video 90% of the time now. You can see everything that occurred. And so walkthroughs have slowly disappeared. And that preliminary statement is generally turned into, let's review body camera footage really quick. And then after there's some other steps of round counts and weapon exchange, you go home for a few days before you provide your statement.
And I think that it's also important to be fair and kind of describe and explain, yes, you're going to get your gun removed, okay? That is SOP. It's obvious SOP. It's to secure evidence to make sure that they know that how many times your gun was fired. You do the round counts. And again, it goes back to that idea, okay, you're a police officer and you think that the department has now put a line in the sand. It's not what the case is. A lot of times the department, all it's doing is just doing its SOP and to make sure that the integrity of the entire case is held.
Yeah, and trying to be mindful. These are steps. It's a criminal investigation, and on any crime, you collect evidence. And it's hard. I've had officers that have been in shootings that when we go to swap their weapon out, they're like, I've carried this gun for 18 years. That is the gun that has been on my hip every single day for 18 years. That's hard to, if you don't have any compassion for a guy that, all the emotions that go through with all of that, and trying to bear in mind this isn't personal. When I would go out there, it was uncomfortable when I'd pull up and I would be the investigator and the officer involved would be somebody that I know well. And it's awkward because ultimately I've got a crime I have to investigate, and part of that process is swapping out his weapon, downloading mags so we can do a round count, things of that nature, and trying to maintain that this is just professional. We're going through here. This isn't personal. There's not a line drawn. It's a challenge. I mean, for both parties, because as a cop, you empathize with somebody that's gone through that critical incident. Nobody wants to take another human's life.
Right. Now, on this next aspect that we're going to talk about is immediately after. So the scene's cleared. You've done what you needed to do. The walkthrough. You've gone through. You've had your gun replaced, removed and replaced. Photos been taken. You've given a preliminary statement. But let's talk about what you've seen and what you would recommend. What is happening immediately after? So, first and foremost, let's kick it off with this, because one thing that I've seen tends to happen is social media starts to blow up and a speculation starts to happen. The officer's name isn't released immediately, but a lot of times that gets leaked out almost immediately because of people being able to witness them on the street and on the scene exactly. So they start speculating and so let's talk about what happens from there, because in episode 3 we're going to talk about the aftermath of the actual shooting and how it affects your family and how it affects your home life and how it affects your personal life, how it even affects your work life. But there's an immediate aspect that you need to understand on that same day ultimately. So what do you recommend, and what are some of the steps that you understand or would give immediately after the shooting for your personal life?
One of the things, the last thing you'll probably be thinking about after a critical incident is social media and what are some things that are going to happen. But it's really important as your name or photo or both begin to trickle out in the minutes, hours immediately following a critical incident. People are going to be Googling you. People are going to be looking for you, as well as the media. A lot of cops are social. A lot of cops are involved with social media. The last thing you probably want is pictures of your spouse, pictures of your children, maybe pictures of your home, your autos being pushed out over over the internet. So literally, after you're involved in one, unfortunately, one of the things you need to start considering, or as a companion officer, help that officer start thinking about, is unpublishing your social media. Try to protect and insulate your family the best you can. Unfortunately, you've just been in a shooting, and that's the last thing you want to be thinking about. But we're in a second-by-second news cycle now, and literally time is of the essence on maybe preventing your spouse or your kids from their pictures being posted all over the internet.
Okay. And so when you start talking about the idea of your family, as is when you come home, and I'm sure, of course, you're probably going to call your wife or call your husband if you're, of course, a female officer, or your direct immediate family, and let them know that what just happened and it's going on. When you go home, and what would you recommend the conversation be to relay to your family?
The first phone call, I would try, if you can, to make it be you, so they hear your voice. And probably the first thing out of your mouth is be sure they hear, "I'm okay, I'm safe," because they're going to know it may be calling at a weird time, or if it's 3 a.m. or 2 a.m., don't let it be some guy or, an officer they've never heard of. Let them know right off the bat, "Hey, I'm safe, but I was just involved in this." And when you get home that night, try and embrace your family for the aftermath that may follow. You need to start immediately focus on inward. You need to focus inward on yourself, your family, your well-being, your attorney, and insulating yourself in the potential that lies ahead from that. And that's really being selfish and looking inward after that. You need to try and get a good REM cycle of sleep. That's going to help you mine those details. REM cycles of sleep specifically help your mind mine that information out. Alcohol impairs that. Don't go home and destroy a 12-pack. And really start looking inward to your family and yourself after that.
And question that I think needs to be answered as well is, ultimately you're told not to talk to anybody. Okay. Is there any ramifications if you talk to your spouse?
No, you can visit with your spouse about it. That will be your call of how much or how little she may want to know. But have an understanding that your coworkers are going to be concerned. They're going to call and check on you. They're going to call, which is great. Or if you're an officer calling someone that's been in a shooting, call and check on them, but don't ask about the shooting. If I call Slater and tell him, "Dude, what happened? I heard you got a shooting the other night. What happened?" The moment Slater starts telling me, he's just made me a witness to his case and potential to be subpoenaed to court ultimately, or called into IA. He's just made me a witness. And everybody that calls Slater and asks him, and he tells them, "Well, dude, I shot that guy," you're not helping Aaron, because you've just made 14 more witnesses to the case, criminally and administratively.
Well, and I guess that goes back to my question is, if you talk to your spouse, can she be considered a witness at that point?
There is spousal privilege. There is clergy penitent privilege. And there is obviously attorney-client privilege. Okay. Clergy, probably one of the oldest, probably older than attorney-client privilege, but there's basically three. There's a medical one, which they can subpoena medical records at times, but spouse, clergy, and attorney are clear.
Okay. So it is okay to go home, and if you feel comfortable with talking to your spouse, you can talk to your spouse and not worry that she can be subpoenaed or he can be subpoenaed to testify against you as a witness.
Yeah, I've heard cops get divorces, so if you know it's on the rocks, maybe don't go home and do that. But.
Completely understand that. Completely understand. But the bottom line is I just wanted to get across that you don't go and talk to your partners about it. You don't go talk to really anybody else, but only the protected class aspect of the attorney, clergy, and spouse, if you feel comfortable with those three. So, yes, and what's going to be talked about in episode 3, of course, is what happens after this day. And there's a whole lot that happens. There's a whole lot of emotional side of things. There's a whole lot that happens with the family. There's a lot more that happens with the legal side of things. And ultimately, as far as the investigation goes, we're going to talk about how it gets drawn out, what happens throughout that time. So, just wrapping this one up, guys, and I encourage you to watch episode 3, and if you haven't watched episode 1, go back and watch episode 1, because when you put it all together, you will have a great education about critical incidents and what it's going to be about, and inform yourself so that you're really in the know. And if you're in the know, it takes the scariness out of it, okay?
Absolutely.
Yes, it's all going to be very, very uncomfortable to go through, but that's kind of what we signed up for when we decided to become cops, to the understanding of these are the challenges that we have to deal with. But ultimately, be informed, guys, and understand that this is, all part of what you're going to go through. As far as the next episode, stay tuned for it. Remember, share everything that you have on this with as many cops as you possibly can, because especially in this day and time, the problem that we're having today is a lot of times cops just don't know. Guys, continue to do your job. Yes, it's getting harder, and yes, it's getting to the point to where it's getting harder because we're being attacked unjustifiably, okay? But if we know that, and we know that going into the deal, it makes it a little bit easier for us to deal with it. But Clint's going to be coming back on the next episode, and the next episode is the aftermath that follows it. A lot of things that we're going to be talking about is what Clint likes to talk about is PTS, and I'll let him explain that on the next episode again. And we're going to talk about the family, and we're going to talk about how the department treats you. And there's a lot of things that happen, guys, that you're not going to expect until you have learned it, and that's what we're going to try to educate you with. So with that being said, thank you, Clint. I appreciate you coming on.
Always good to be on.
And guys, as always, this profession is going to continue to have obstacles, and they're going to get bigger and they're going to get wider. But you go over them, around them, or right through them, but you be relentless and you stay relentless. Stay safe. God bless.